Noise Marines saturate the war zone with extreme psychosonic attacks that unleash shattering noise and aural destruction. These hedonistic worshippers of Slanesh are inured to most stimuli and seek to unleash the most cacophonous riots to stir their jaded senses. Hi, it's Tacticus, and today we're having a first look at Shiron Capersi, the Idolator. We're going to look at the model, how he plays and his abilities, his uses for hero release events, for guild traits, and for the first time we'll get a look at the character's unique relic as well as the mission chain that will eventually get him to Mythic. First off, I was wondering about the name. Shiron Capersi does definitely sound like a composer to me, but not like one I'd like the music of. The 40k wiki tells me that both parts of his name are typical names from Chamos, the lost Emperor's children homeworld. It does seem though that the character himself isn't based on a specific marine from the lore. I personally don't like the pink and green combination with the teal weapon parts. The whole Emperor's Children aesthetic always seemed a bit corny to me. But if you think it's the greatest thing, let me know in the comments. The demonic face on the Sonic Blaster is a cool touch though, and the giant amplifiers on his power pack are probably just loud enough to burst his eardrums every time he uses them. What an exquisite new experience that must be. The first time around. Or he just uses earplugs, I don't know. Please let me know in the comments what music you would play with those large blasters to annoy your enemies the most. Looking at Shiron's profile, he can use a defensive item, a crit item and a crit booster. He's uncommon, which will secure him for you pretty fast. I look at values as usual comparing characters at Gold 1 and Epic 1, as this is easy to reach for most players. Of course I already factored in Archimatos rework for those. Shiron's defenses are pretty average. No, really. His health is just barely below average, with him being an equal to Roswitha, Han, the Neurotrope, Bellator or Isabella. With this, he's in place 60 out of the 97 characters we have right now. It's okay. His armor is better at place 40, with, again, a lot of characters sharing the spot. Haken, Asgore, Ulf and Lucius, just to name a few. Let's just say Shiron is not supposed to be a defensive character, but has decent enough bulk to not immediately crumple. I can respect that. Let's rather look at his offensive stats, which should be more exciting. The move of 3 is standard for most Space Marines. The damage of 142 seems uninspiring. You know what? It's the worst. It's only 3/4 of Njal or Immospec. And Immospec at least does increase damage when he shoots in Overwatch. Now then, it's only half the picture. Shiron has 6 hits and thus lower damage per hit is going to be expected. Let's start with his ranged attack, as it will be his main way of attacking. This puts him in place 30 out of 46 characters with ranged attacks against enemies with no armor. This is a bit better than Tan and a bit worse than Burkhard or Makotep. Since both his melee and ranged damage have the eviscerating characteristic, Shiron does an excellent 50% of piercing. With this, Shiron goes up to place 24 out of 46 against enemies with infinite armor. This is also slightly below average, just a tad behind Typhus and Makotep. His melee attacks are of course nothing to write home about, but if you wondered, against no armor he is in last place again, behind Makotep and Typhus again, and against infinite armor he is placed 75, just behind Apraxas. The higher pierce actually is pretty good. Now, why might this offensive prowess still be pretty good? Let's start by saying that range 3 is very rare and can be very useful. Shiron's threat range of 6 is actually really good. The Thrill Seeker trait he shares with Lucius only for now means that Shiron will get a 1-round buff of 15% to his crit chance when being attacked or attacking an enemy with full health. The additional crit chance is great, but the secondary effect of always overkilling enemies when they are defeated by a crit is a tad more interesting for Shiron. His passive ability increases his damage by 85 for each time he overkilled or would have suppressed an enemy unit. A few notes about this. First off, I love how this is written, as even characters you kill would have been suppressed, and it also includes enemies like Terminators and bosses that can't be suppressed. You can see on screen that when the attack hits, the enemies get suppressed first and then die. You can get a maximum of 6 stacks of this, but that by no means means that it will take 6 turns to accrue. Since every ranged attack of Shiron will suppress the enemy due to his suppression trait, you will get 1 stack per attack, and if you overkill you will actually get a second. The extra damage is significant and can skyrocket Shiron really fast. While the overkill will happen more often technically due to the Thrill Seeker trait, I'm not sure how often it will actually happen, as the killing hit would need to be a crit, and one of the latter hits being a crit is pretty rare, and when one of the first 3 hits would kill the enemy, you overkill anyways. Now, Terrifying Crescendo needs a bit to get going, but for our example at level 35, 2 stacks will more than double our damage, with 6 stacks quadrupling it. That is mighty. 3 stacks is like a continual buff from Altion, 6 is double that. And you can take Altion in addition. Shiron's active, Excruciating Frequencies, deals 1 hit of high blast damage to 3 hexes in a straight line. It has a higher crit chance depending on the number of fighters on the affected hexes, including your own, but only deals the damage to enemy fighters, which also gets suppressed. As a ranged attack, this active profits from the passive ability, but the active suppression effect means that you can get, if you overkill the enemies on all 3 hexes, a full 6 stacks of the passive in 1 turn. As the active only deals 1 hit, I think fueling the passive with the active might be the better idea. The suppression effect which Shiron constantly deals out might stem from enemies trying to cover their ears. Suppression makes enemies deal less damage. You could say it's effectively a defensive trait. The -1 move wouldn't be exciting if it weren't for the huge range of Shiron, which will also let him effectively shut down Overwatch fighters with a range of 2, like the dreaded Revas. Lastly, Shiron features the heavy weapon trait, further increasing his damage by 25% for just standing still. Hard with range 2, but with range 3 that will actually come up pretty regularly. Look at Sakael or Kalandis. I didn't factor it in my damage chart, as other characters also have effects that increase their damage. Especially for guild raids, we don't have a lot of chaos ranged options that might profit from Apraxas for example. But combined with his passive, Shiron does really good damage with his ranged attack. Now, when I started, Morgan Ra was still a staple of the multi-hit team. People that didn't have him used Folk. When I had either, they were irrelevant. But a high damage, high hits character might just slot in. He doesn't benefit from Ragnar, who's the main attraction of the team right now, but I'm really tempted to give Shiron a spin with Altion to help him out. So let's try out a few teams really quick. All characters I use have legendary 11 equipment, are Blue Star and Diamond 3 with level 50 abilities. Those are some rough drafts that guild raid experts could of course improve upon. We'll try to tackle Cole, as my mech team doesn't work against him. Shiron could potentially fit in well with the Psyker team as well as with the multi-hit team. In both cases, Altion can buff his damage further, and since he can also put up neuro stacks, I want him with me in both cases. Let's start with the base Psyker team. As its main damage comes from the psychic damage and Cole doesn't heal himself anymore, and instead increases his armor since this update, we don't need Mephisto necessarily, even if he can build up 2 stacks of Neuroparasite around. Shiron I'll only try to fit in, since he can also build a stack of Neuroparasite as well, but might potentially outdamage one of the other characters. The main damage comes from the fully stacked Neurotrope in the turn Yazagor uses his active. We need the Neurotrope, Yazagor for the active, and Apraxas for the quick build-up of stacks, fire, and his summons to tackle Cole's summons. Not taking Ahriman would mean 33% less damage in the big turn with Psychic Stalk ability, which hurts a lot. In that case, the Forge Fiend would be less important and the Exorcist would become more appealing. We could debate getting him instead of Eltrion, as the latter doesn't help a lot with the Neurotrope at all. Let's try the Psychic team with Neurotrope, Yazagor, Apraxas and Ahriman plus Shiron first. First off, we get the summons out of the way, gunning with Shiron for stacks of his passive. Round 2, we can get the Neuroparasite started as well as get some more stacks of Shiron. Sadly, we can't have Shiron next to Apraxas that round, since he needs that space. The Forge Fiend ensures fire on Coil's Hex for the extra damage. I let the rest play out. Shiron starts doing 10k damage fast and close to 20k in the end. 433,000 damage total definitely seems like a good result to me. Second, we try a hybrid team of Neurotrope, Yazagor, Apraxas, Eltion and Shiron. So let's make sure that Call always stands on fire when we attack him. Try to get Shiron next to Apraxas for the extra hit and 2 stacks of Parasite in one attack, mirroring Mephiston. The Exorcist also needs you to attack enemies on fire hexes and Apraxas, and if you're lucky the Blue Horrors will handle the fire setting. Whenever Eltrion is present, he can help Shiron get the overkill on the summons for stacks early. Let's see. I get close to 520k damage here. That is definitely a big number. We can also try a multi-hit team. There we need Eltrion, Shiron and, well, let's take Kalgar for the further damage increase, Bellator to keep the enemy still with his summons, and Ragnar. As a machine of war we take the Forge Fiend for enemy removal. While we don't profit from his active much this time, Ragnar still does 7 hits, and with the Eltrion buff of 898 per hit, plus Kalgar's extra buff for 898 damage, or in Ragnar's case 1298 damage instead, I choose Ragnar over Karn. Ragnar profits more from the buffs and can use his active for 3 characters effectively once per game. Karn has a higher PS ratio and potentially more attacks due to his passive. Really choose for yourself. Well, in any way, this time Shiron is among the main damage dealers, with a buff from Kalgar and Eltrion plus his own damage buff. At the end, he can do 18,000 damage without even high ground. It was not an optimal run, but the 370,000 damage show potential. You might be better off with close combat characters optimally using Ragnar though. Now, what does Shiron do in legendary events? Let's see how many characters of the combination of Xenos and Chaos, and Imperium and Chaos we now have each, as legendary events always exclude one faction. Starting with his attack type, Shiron's Eviscerate is incredibly rare. Without Imperium, we now have 7 characters, which makes him a great asset. Without Xenos, Eviscerate now just became possible. Blast from his active is also quite rare. Without Xenos, there are now 7 characters that sport it, without Imperium it stays inaccessible. Suppression without Xenos is now exactly 5 characters and now possible. Heavy Weapon without Xenos is now 6, which is still very rare, but without the Imperium it stays out of reach. 6 and 5 hits without Xenos now has 6 characters, and without Imperium it's still only 7 characters. Basically, everything Shiron does is pretty unique. He's a rockstar after all. And he seems to have fans in the Imperium, as he will be much more important in the without Xenos tracks. He could be the linchpin of some of those teams and really worthwhile to build for hero release events. Not necessarily for the ones going on now, but with the shift to rarer requirements for those events, I feel like he could become important. Now, towards the mythic part. If you have enjoyed my character review so far, I'd really love if you subscribe to this channel, as I talk about every new character coming into the game. I will also soon upload a video on the whole economic implications of the mythic update, so stay tuned. And if you haven't used any referral code yet, you can get 100 Blackstone right now by using my referral code BAD60ADO. This will support me in game, with the rewards on screen depending on which level milestones you reach. Shiron's Artefact isn't a musical instrument as I would have imagined, but instead it's drugs? It wasn't unlocked in the test build, so I couldn't try it, but I could get a glimpse. The intoxicating elixir can only be equipped by Shiron, and he places his crit booster. It slightly changes Shiron's gameplay by increasing Shiron's damage further for every enemy in 2 hexes which is suppressed, stunned, taunted or thrilled. I sadly cannot try if he himself counts when attacking a healthy opponent, but I would guess that he at least counts when he was attacked the round before and is still thrilled. Since suppression is added before dealing damage, I suppose that if you're close enough, you will get 1 stack of the buff automatically. This buff can be applied 6 times and starts at 295 damage. It is also doubled when he's below 50%. This is a huge buff, but as we have seen with most other relics, you have to play to its strength. We'll have to see whether the Emperor's Children will help with this, but if Shiron should become the main damage dealer in anyone's team, I can imagine building the rest of the team around, further increasing his damage. The intended way to get a character to the mythic rarity is their mythic questline after getting them to Blue Star. They show how you're supposed to play the character and will be accessible from August the 20th. They consist of 5 missions, which each give out 4 mythic shards and 2 mythic orbs, which means they pay for the Ascension. Mission 1 wants 3 suppressed enemies to be defeated in 1 turn. With the active, this is pretty easy, and you can just go to some level in Fall of Cadia, line up 3 enemies. Part 2 is a little more difficult, needing you to do 12,000 damage while affected by Thrillseeker. You can either try to get an enemy to attack you, or attack a fully healthy enemy. You still need to do a lot of damage. In guild raids, for example, you can get it with Eltion's help and standing still on early guild raid bosses, for example, killing the summons with Shiron to get a few stacks of his passive up. The 3rd tier needs 100 enemies overkilled, which should be easy enough. Do it by going along, or do it in Fall of Cadia with the help of a friendly Voxcaster. Mythic Mission 4 is a head scratcher. Maybe you can make out what I'm doing wrong. It wants you to defeat 3 enemies affected by Night Shroud in 1 turn. Night Shroud is Sibyl's passive effect. It will only apply to an enemy starting next to her, and since you will hardly find any Sibyls in Arena, you will have to go to the campaign. Since it only says defeat, you should be able to do this by making the enemies flee. To be exact, this should be the only way you can do this, as with the shape of Sibyl in its midst, you can only hit 2 in a straight line no matter what, and have to hope for the last one to just flee, which is a bit frustrating, especially since you need the active for that. Sibyl herself doesn't count, and one of those 2 guardsmen here needs to flee. Well, we were lucky this time, but this could take some tries, and it somehow still didn't count. Any ideas what I'm doing wrong? The last one is just a simple stat check, which needs you to do 100,000 damage. Arena and guild raids with Eltion as a helper should work nicely. So, that's Shiron. I like his damage, and I think he's fairly interesting gameplay wise. I don't know how much I like him opening up so many LRE requirements, since sure, we'll get them at some point, but it's more characters to build, to say the least. Let me know how you like this questionable musician in the comments, and while you're still here, feel free to watch more of my videos. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon with my analysis of the economical changes in this huge update.